Picture the air in South Carolina in 1808. It wasn't just hot. It was thick. Like wet wool laid over your lungs, it was heavy. And it pressed down on everything, the fields, the big houses, and especially the people. It was the kind of heat that made secrets stew and boil, until they were ready to burst right out of the ground. And secrets, my friends, were the only crop truly thriving at Oak Ridge Plantation that summer. Oak Ridge belonged to the Caldwell family, or at least it had belonged to Mr. Arthur Caldwell. But Arthur was gone now. A sudden fever had taken him right after the rice harvest, leaving behind a widow, Mrs. Ellalinina Caldwell, and 3 young daughters, all of them ladies who knew how to embroider a fine cushion, but who knew absolutely nothing about running 1,000 acres of debt-ridden land. Ellalinina sat in the parlor, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the blinding sun, trying to pretend the world hadn't ended. But the world had definitely ended. It hadn't ended with a bang, but with the quiet, terrifying rustle of legal papers and the scratching pen of Mr. Pearl Finch, the family lawyer. Pearl Finch was a small, nervous man who smelled perpetually of lavender and bad news. He held the key to the Caldwell future right there in his sweaty little hand, which was clutching Arthur's last will and testament. Mrs. Caldwell, the lawyer squeaked, adjusting his spectacles. The situation is delicate. Ellalinina didn't need him to tell her that. She was wearing black mourning clothes that felt like they were actively trying to suffocate her, and she hadn't slept a proper night since Arthur had coughed his last breath. Her eldest, Clara, sat stiffly beside her, pale as the linen she was sewing, already understanding that her fate was tied to the fate of the land. Beatrice, the middle daughter, was trying to soothe the youngest, Lily, who kept asking why Papa wasn't coming back for supper. "Get to the point, Mr. Finch," Ellalinina said, her voice dry as the dusty road outside. She was a woman built for society balls and managing household staff, not for facing down insolvency. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Caldwell, bless his soul, was a man of great vision, but perhaps less great accounting. The debts are substantial. The mortgage holder, the bank in Charleston, is circling. But Arthur, he had a fail-safe. A condition written years ago, hoping to protect the estate from the vultures. Ellalinina leaned forward. Hope, small and fragile, flickered. What condition? The Caldwell family line, Finch whispered, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves had ears. The deed states that Oak Ridge must remain under the stewardship of a Caldwell heir, specifically, a male heir, capable of inheriting and managing the estate, within 5 years of Mr. Caldwell's passing. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ellalinina stared at her 3 beautiful, utterly female daughters. A male heir, Ellalinina repeated. It sounded like a cruel joke played by a dead man. "Percival, I have 3 daughters. That is all." "I understand, madam, but the condition stands. If within 5 years a male heir is not produced, recognized, and confirmed, a grandson, perhaps, or a son born posthumously, which clearly is not the case, the estate reverts to the closest living male relative of the Caldwell bloodline. And that, Mrs. Caldwell," Finch shuddered, "is Silas Thorne." Now, if the name Arthur Caldwell brought to mind dignity and generosity, the name Silas Thorne brought to mind a hungry, lean wolf. Silas was Arthur's second cousin, a man known for his harshness, his cruelty to his own workers, and his absolute disregard for the land itself. He was just waiting for Oak Ridge to collapse so he could swoop in, sell off the slaves, chop down the ancient oaks for quick timber, and leave the fields barren. The thought of Silas Thorne owning her home, and worse, owning the 200 souls who lived and toiled on the property, the very people Arthur had sworn to protect, made Ellalinina's stomach churn with icy fear. 5 years, Ellalinina murmured. And if Clara marries quickly and produces a son? Clara, only 18, blushed fiercely. "Mama, I am not even courted." "And even if she were," Finch interjected, "the clock is ticking. The bank will not wait for courtship and gestation. They want assurance now, collateral. We are months, perhaps weeks, from foreclosure, if we cannot demonstrate a plan for continuity." The lawyer packed up his papers, leaving behind a silence heavier than the humid air. Eleanor watched the carriage roll away down the long, dusty drive. She watched until the last speck of dust settled, and then she walked out onto the wide veranda, her mind a whirlwind of panic and despair. She looked over the fields. The cotton was promising, but the rice paddies needed serious work. The overseer, Mr. Higgins, was competent but lazy, and he lacked the true authority Arthur had wielded. Evelina's eyes swept past the fields, past the storage sheds, and landed inevitably on the quarters, the rows of small cabins where the enslaved people lived. And there, standing tall near the blacksmith's forge, was Isaiah. Isaiah was Arthur's driver, the man responsible for managing the day-to-day work, ensuring the schedules were kept, and dealing with the field gangs. He wasn't just a driver. He was the backbone of Oak Ridge. He was 28 years old, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet, undeniable authority. Even Higgins, the white overseer, deferred to Isaiah's judgment on the land. Isaiah was busy talking to a group of men, pointing toward the irrigation ditch that needed clearing. He spoke softly, but when he spoke, the men listened. He was intelligent, capable, and possessed a dignity that seemed too large for the circumstances he was born into. Evelina had known Isaiah her entire life. He had been a boy when she arrived at Oak Ridge as a bride. He was Arthur's most trusted asset, more reliable than any hired white hand. Arthur had always said, "If you want to know the truth about the land, Evelina, don't ask Higgins. Ask Isaiah." As she watched him, a thought so shocking, so monstrous, so utterly dangerous dropped into Evelina's mind like a stone into a deep well. It was a thought born of desperation, fear, and the sheer brutal necessity of survival. If the Caldwell line needed a male heir to save the land, and if her daughters were too young or too far from marriage, and if the bank was closing in, who was the most capable man on the entire property? The men who knew the land better than Arthur ever did. The men whose strength and intelligence could secure their future. It was Isaiah. The idea was madness. It was treason against the very structure of their society. It was a secret that, if ever revealed, would destroy her, her daughters, and certainly Isaiah. But the alternative was ruin. Silas Thorne, the bank, and the destruction of everything Arthur had built. Evelina stood there for a long time, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of blood orange and guilt. She watched Isaiah finish his instructions and walk toward the main barn, his shadow stretching long and powerful across the dust. She had to save Oak Ridge. She had to save her daughters. And to do that, she realized, she needed to make a deal with the devil. Or perhaps, with the man everyone else considered property. She spent the next 3 days in a haze of internal conflict, barely eating, barely speaking. She watched her daughters, their innocent faces oblivious to the financial guillotine hanging over their heads. She watched Isaiah, calculating his movements, his character, his silent strength. Finally, on the 4th evening, after the lamps were lit and the house was quiet, Evelina decided. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was certain destruction. She waited until the servants had retired. She waited until the clock in the hall chimed 11 times. She pulled a dark shawl over her shoulders, took the heavy iron key to the storehouse from her husband's desk, a key only Arthur had ever carried, and slipped out the back door. The night was hot and silent, full of the buzzing of insects and the distant, mournful croak of frogs in the swamp. She walked carefully, keeping to the shadows of the oaks, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt like a thief, a criminal, or perhaps a spy entering enemy territory. She wasn't heading for the quarters. She was heading for the storehouse, where Arthur kept the valuable tools, the imported goods, and, most importantly, the specialized equipment for the rice paddies, equipment Isaiah needed constant access to. She reached the heavy wooden door, inserted the key, and turned it with a loud, grating clunk. The smell of burlap, dried tobacco, and oil hit her instantly. She didn't need to call his name. She knew he would be there. Isaiah often spent the late hours in the storehouse, checking inventory, repairing tools, doing the administrative work Arthur had entrusted to him, work that kept the plantation running smoothly while the white overseer was sleeping off his liquor. He was sitting at a small workbench, illuminated by a single weak oil lamp, sketching diagrams for a new irrigation sluice on a scrap of paper. He looked up instantly, his dark eyes wide with surprise. "Mistress Caldwell," he said, rising immediately. His voice was deep, steady, and utterly respectful, but there was an underlying tension, a question in his tone. White ladies, especially the mistress of the house, did not venture into the storehouse at midnight. "Isaiah," she whispered, stepping fully into the lamplight. She pulled the shawl tighter around her, trying to gather the courage she needed. "I need to speak with you. Now. In private. And what I'm about to say must never, under any circumstance, be repeated. Not to your family, not to the other hands, and certainly not to the overseer." Isaiah simply nodded, his face unreadable. He put down the charcoal pencil and stood waiting, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He was a mountain of calm patience, waiting for the desperate woman standing before him to speak her impossible truth. Evelina took a deep breath, the smell of the stored goods grounding her slightly. She looked at him, not seeing property, not seeing a slave, but seeing the only solution left in her doomed world. "Mr. Caldwell, Arthur's death, it has left us exposed. Isaiah, you know the finances were tight, but you don't know how tight. The lawyer was here. The estate is conditional." She explained the will quickly, clearly, stripping away the legal jargon and laying out the bare, terrifying facts. Silas Thorne was coming, and if a male heir wasn't secured, Oak Ridge was lost. Isaiah listened without interruption, his expression never changing, absorbing the weight of the information. He knew the plantation was struggling. He felt the pressure every day. But the threat of Silas Thorne, that was a real terror. Everyone knew what happened when Silas took over a property. Families were broken up and sold south. When she finished, the silence returned, thick and heavy. "I understand the situation, Mistress Caldwell," Isaiah finally said. "It is a grave danger. For everyone here." "A grave danger," Evelina agreed, her voice trembling now. "And I have considered every possible path. Clara is too young. Beatrice too flighty. We have no time for proper marriages, no guarantee of a grandson, even if we did. The bank will move before the first baby is weaned." She walked closer to the workbench, her shadow merging with his in the lamplight. She lowered her voice until it was barely a breath. "Isaiah, you are the most capable man on this property. You know the land. You know the books Arthur kept. You have the strength and the mind to run Oak Ridge better than Arthur ever did." He didn't respond to the praise, only watched her eyes, waiting for the final, terrible proposition. "I need an heir, Isaiah," she whispered. "A son. A Caldwell son, who will be born on this land, who will be presented as the legitimate, posthumous child of Arthur Caldwell, and who will legally inherit this estate when he comes of age." She paused, letting the enormity of the request hang between them. "I need your help to save us all. I need you to give me that son." Isaiah did not flinch, but his eyes, deep in the shadows of the lamplight, finally registered the shock. This was not a request for extra work or a new schedule. This was a request that broke every rule of God, men, and the law of the land. It was a deal for salvation, wrapped in sin and immense personal hazard. "Mistress Caldwell," he said slowly, his voice rough, "you know what you are asking. If this secret ever escapes this room, you will be ruined. And I will be dead. Or worse." "I know the risk," Evelina insisted, desperate now. "But what is the alternative?" "Ruin. The destruction of this community. You know what Silas Thorne will do to your people, Isaiah. You know he will sell every one of you south and break every family bond." That hit him. That was the lever. It wasn't about saving Evelina Caldwell's comfort. It was about saving the 200 people who relied on Oakage, people he considered his own responsibility. The threat of the chain gang in the Deep South was a living nightmare for every person in the quarters. "If I agree," Isaiah said, his gaze steady, "what is the arrangement? What guarantee do I have for the safety of the child, and the safety of the people here?" Evelina reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a rolled piece of parchment tied with a thin silk ribbon. It was a document Arthur had signed years ago, a document she had retrieved from the safe after the reading of the will. "This," she said, holding it out, "is the manumission paper for your mother, Sarah. Arthur signed it 5 years ago, but never filed it. He intended it as a reward for loyalty, but he was always too cautious to let her go. I will file this tomorrow, quietly, under the pretense of a clerical error. Your mother will be free. She will stay here working, but she will be a free woman." Isaiah's hand trembled slightly as he took the paper. Freedom for his mother. It was the dream they had whispered about for decades. It was a sign of good faith, a down payment on this terrifying bargain. "And for the child," he pressed. "The child will be raised as Arthur's son. He will be educated. He will be loved. And he will inherit this estate, securing the future for everyone. You will remain the driver, the trusted manager, the man who runs Oakridge, just as you do now. You will be his protector, Isaiah, and his silent father. And when that child is born, I will sign the manumission papers for you, to be kept by Mr. Finch, the lawyer, only to be filed upon the child's 21st birthday, when he legally takes control of Oakage." It was a binding contract, written in blood, fear, and sheer audacious hope. It was a promise of freedom, but a freedom tied to a secret that could easily kill him. Isaiah looked at the parchment in his hand, then at the desperate, pale face of the mistress of the house. He was being asked to risk everything for the sake of the people he cared for. He was being asked to become a ghost father to a boy who would walk in the world as a white man. He folded the manumission paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt. "I agree, Mistress Caldwell," he said, his voice low and firm. "I will do this. For the sake of the people of Oakage. But you must swear to me that you will never betray the secret, not even to your own daughters, until the boy is safe." "I swear it on Arthur's grave," Evelina vowed, relief flooding her, making her legs weak. "The secret stays between us. It is the only thing that saves us." And so, in the dead of the South Carolina night, surrounded by sacks of cotton and the quiet hum of the doomed plantation, the most dangerous bargain in the history of Oakridge was struck. The enslaved men had agreed to give the Caldwell widow the heir she needed, setting in motion a chain of events that would defy the laws of the land and challenge the very definition of family and freedom. The long, agonizing wait for the arrival of the false heir had begun. The sun rose over Oakage the next morning, but for Evelina, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. Everything looked the same, the old oaks, the dusty drive, the fields waiting for the morning gangs, but nothing was the same. She had stepped across a line in the dark, and now she had to live in the daylight with the enormity of her decision. Her first act was the hardest. She had to make good on her promise to Isaiah. Percival Finch, the lawyer, arrived mid-morning, smelling faintly of citrus and suspicion. He was used to dealing with wills and debts, not sudden acts of conscience. "Mrs. Caldwell," he chirped, adjusting his uncomfortable collar. "You summoned me concerning a document." Evelina presented the manumission paper for Sarah, Isaiah's mother, which Arthur had signed 5 years prior. "This, Mr. Finch, was clearly intended to be filed. My husband must have simply overlooked the paperwork. A clerical oversight, nothing more. I wish it processed immediately." Finch held the paper as if it might burn him. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is highly unusual. Arthur was meticulous, and freeing a person of color, especially one related to the highly valuable driver Isaiah, is a significant financial loss. It is my wish, Percival," Evelina stated, her voice cold and steady, the voice of the mistress of Oakage, a tone she rarely used, but which always commanded obedience. Consider it a posthumous act of kindness from my late husband. We must honor his intentions. File it quietly. I do not want this discussed beyond the necessary legal offices. Finch, terrified of the bank, and even more terrified of crossing a Caldwell who sounded like she was about to snap, scribbled a note on his pad. As you wish, madam. Though I must say, given the current financial precariousness. The precariousness is exactly why we must maintain good relations with those who keep this place running. Percival, she interrupted, sealing the lie. And just like that, Sarah, the cook who had served the Caldwell family for 30 years, was a free woman. It was a secret freedom, of course. She continued her duties, but the knowledge of the filed papers was a monumental weight lifted from Isaiah's soul, and a heavy chain binding Elalina to the pact. Isaiah knew what Elalina had done before the lawyer's carriage was even out of sight. Sarah told him, her face a mixture of disbelief and profound gratitude. It was the first time in his life he had seen a true, tangible reward for his labor and his mother's endurance. It made the immense risk he was taking feel slightly less suicidal. Elalina had proven she was capable of action and secrecy. Now began the most terrifying part of the bargain. The nights became a blur of suffocating heat and profound, shared dread. Elalina would wait until the household was silent, until the breathing of her daughters was slow and even, and then she would slip out. She never went to the quarters. That would have been visible, dangerous, and insulting. She went to the storehouse, or sometimes to the small, unused study in the back wing of the house, a room Arthur had used only for late-night brandy and cigars. The encounters were entirely functional, devoid of passion, fueled only by the cold necessity of survival. It was a business transaction, where the currency was Elalina's reputation and Isaiah's life. Isaiah was always respectful, always silent, and always aware of the dagger hanging over both their heads. He never looked at her with anything but intense focus, recognizing the shared danger. It was not a relationship built on affection, but on mutual, desperate dependence. They were two conspirators locked in a dark room, working toward a single, terrifying goal, an heir. Elalina found herself living two distinct lives. By day, she was the grieving, struggling widow, managing the household, attending to the endless demands of the plantation, and trying to soothe her anxious daughters. By night, she was a criminal, a woman breaking every societal law, risking everything for the sake of the land. The strain began to show, not in public outbursts, but in the deep, hollow circles under her eyes, and a new, brittle quality to her temper. Her eldest daughter, Clara, noticed immediately. Clara was 18, sharp, and already carrying the weight of the family's future on her slender shoulders. "Mama," Clara said one afternoon, finding Elalina staring blankly at a half-finished embroidery hoop. "Are you unwell? You seem distracted. And you are barely sleeping. I hear you moving about the house late." Elalina forced a weak smile. "Just the worries of the estate, my dear. The ledgers are a nightmare, and Mr. Finch's letters are relentless. I am afraid I'm simply not built for this kind of stress." That was the official story. Financial stress and widow's grief. It was plausible, and Clara accepted it, though she continued to watch her mother with a worried frown. Beatrice, the middle daughter, was less observant, happily immersed in her sketching and the minor dramas of the household staff. But even Beatrice noticed that their mother relied on Isaiah more than ever. "Mama," Beatrice asked one morning at breakfast, "why is Isaiah meeting with Mr. Finch in the parlor? Should Higgins not be handling the supply lists?" "Mr. Higgins is incompetent," Elalina snapped immediately, regretting her harsh tone. "Isaiah understands the rice crop better than anyone. He is merely reviewing the inventory for the bank. We must show them we are organized." This was another layer of the lie. Elalina was using the financial pressure as a shield. The more she involved Isaiah in the official running of the plantation, the more essential he became, and the less suspicious it seemed that she needed to speak with him constantly, often late, often in private. Isaiah, for his part, handled the increased scrutiny with flawless professionalism. He was everywhere, supervising the ditch clearing, overseeing the cotton weigh-ins, and now frequently sitting across from Elenina in the parlor, discussing crop yields and market prices. He was performing the duties of a plantation manager, a role that was rightfully his, but doing it while wearing the skin of a slave. He was the Rock of Oakage, and the daughters, despite their upbringing, began to rely on his presence. He was the only stable force left after Arthur's death. But every time Clara or Beatrice spoke kindly to him, every time Lily, the youngest, ran to him to show him a flower she had picked, the icy dread in Elenina's stomach intensified. They were relying on a man who was now deeply, criminally entangled with their mother. The secret was not just hers and Isaiah's. It was woven into the very fabric of their family life. Weeks crawled by, stretching into 2 agonizing months. The financial pressure ratcheted up. Finch sent a dire warning: the bank wanted a clear plan, or they would begin the legal process of seizing assets. The 5-year clock was ticking, but the foreclosure clock was moving much faster. Eleanor was consumed by the fear that the pact had failed. What if her age or the stress prevented the desired outcome? What if they had risked everything, Isaiah's life, her reputation, Sarah's freedom, for nothing? She grew thinner, paler. She started avoiding food, claiming the heat made her nauseous. Then one morning, the nausea was real. It wasn't the passing queasiness of a sleepless night. It was a deep, persistent sickness that held her captive until midday. She dismissed it as bad tea, then as the lingering effects of grief. But when the 2nd month passed without the familiar signs, Elenina retreated to her room, trembling. She was pregnant. The realization brought no joy, only a terrible, overwhelming sense of fate closing in. The plan was working, but the success only magnified the danger. There was no turning back now. She was carrying the future of Oakage, a secret child who would be born into a magnificent, elaborate lie. She had to tell Isaiah. She waited until the evening, choosing the small, secluded study. When Isaiah arrived, he looked tired, the day's labor etched into the lines around his eyes. He carried a ledger under his arm, ready to discuss the upcoming fertilizer shipment. Elenina locked the door and turned to face him, the lamplight catching the fear and relief in her eyes. Isaiah, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We have succeeded. He stopped, the ledger slipping slightly in his hand. He didn't ask what she meant. He understood instantly. His face, usually so controlled, showed a flicker of profound shock, quickly replaced by a heavy solemnity. Are you certain, Mistress Caldwell? He asked, his voice low. Yes, she confirmed, clutching her stomach. 2 months. I am certain. A long silence settled between them. They were no longer just conspirators. They were parents, bound by a child who would carry the blood of both the master and the slave. A child who would inherit a world designed to keep his father in chains. We move to the next phase, Elenina stated, her mind already racing ahead. The world must believe I'm carrying Arthur's posthumous child. We must begin the process of making this public, but subtly. I will start withdrawing from society. I will cultivate the appearance of frail health, of deep grief that has finally taken its toll. Isaiah nodded, absorbing the instruction. And the timing? When will you announce the pregnancy? Not yet. Not until it is absolutely safe. But I must begin to lay the groundwork. I need the household to be accustomed to my absence, my sickness. I need the appearance of a delicate mourning widow who is too weak to face the world. The next few weeks were dedicated to the fabrication of Elenina's public narrative. She stopped attending church, claiming headaches. She sent the servants away with vague excuses about needing solitude. She developed a persistent cough, a convenient symptom for the grieving widow. Clara was deeply concerned. Mama, you must see Dr. Jenkins. No, darling, Elenina insisted, waving a hand weakly. "It is just stress. Dr. Jenkins will only tell me to rest, and I have too much on my plate. I need quiet." The quiet, of course, was essential for the continuation of their secret planning. Isaiah became her primary conduit to the outside world. He relayed messages, purchased specialized goods from Charleston under the guise of plantation necessities, and, most importantly, maintained the illusion of Arthur's meticulous financial planning. He created elaborate false ledgers that suggested Arthur had recently secured a large, quiet loan, the reason for Evelynina's sudden, intense preoccupation with the books. This was the cover story they planned to present to Pearl Finch. One afternoon, 3 months into the pregnancy, Evelynina summoned Finch again. She was dressed in heavy black silk, sitting in a darkened room, looking exactly like a woman on the brink of collapse. "Percival," she whispered, her voice thin, "I have news. And I have a solution." Finch, smelling the desperation, leaned forward eagerly. "Mrs. Caldwell, the bank is preparing their final demand." "Stop," Evelynina commanded. She reached out and placed a hand gently over her lower stomach. "Percival, you must keep this absolutely confidential until I deem it safe to announce. I'm carrying Arthur's child." Finch's jaw dropped. He actually fumbled with his spectacles. A son, Mrs. Caldwell. This is miraculous." "But how?" "Arthur and I," she said, inventing the lie with chilling composure, "had a brief, private reconciliation just before the fever took him. It was a final, blessed moment of affection. I had hoped, but I was too afraid to believe it until now. The doctor confirms it." She hadn't seen a doctor, but Finch didn't need to know that. "This changes everything," Finch breathed, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief. "A posthumous heir. This stabilizes the estate immediately. We can present this to the bank as a guarantee of continuity." "When is the child due?" "Late next spring," Evelynina calculated quickly. "But the news must not leave this room, Percival." "Not yet. I am fragile, and the stress of the estate could compromise the pregnancy. I need the bank to back off, but I need the news kept from Silas Thorne. If he knew, he would try to challenge the legitimacy, or worse, try to harm the child." Finch, who feared Silas Thorne almost as much as he feared insolvency, agreed immediately. He saw his own future secured in the promise of a male heir. "I will handle the bank, Mrs. Caldwell. I will inform them of the delicate situation and the guarantee of continuity. They will wait." Evelynina watched him leave, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. The first major hurdle was cleared. The secret was now shared by 3 people, herself, Isaiah, and the nervous lawyer Finch. But the greatest challenge lay in the heart of Oak Ridge itself, her daughters. Clara especially was becoming increasingly suspicious, not of the pregnancy, which she accepted as a heartbreaking miracle, but of her mother's increasing reliance on Isaiah. "Mama, why does Isaiah have access to the master's private study now? And why is he reviewing the accounts alone?" Clara asked one evening, her tone laced with youthful jealousy and concern for order. "Because he is honest, Clara," Evelynina sighed, resting her head against the back of the sofa. "And because he's the only person here who understands Arthur's messy accounting. He is keeping us afloat, child. You must trust him." Trust him. That was the central, terrible irony. Evelynina trusted Isaiah with her life, her future, and the future of her daughters in a way she trusted no one else. He was her co-conspirator, the silent architect of their survival. As the months progressed, Evelynina's pregnancy became unmistakable, and the household gradually adjusted to the miracle. The servants whispered about Arthur's final blessing. The neighbors, when they finally saw Evelynina, always heavily veiled and leaning on Clara's arm, offered condolences and congratulations in the same breath. But the physical reality of the child brought a new, profound complication to the relationship between Evelynina and Isaiah. They were still meeting, discussing the estate, But now their conversations were also about the child. They talked about names. Evelina favored Arthur Jr. Isaiah remained silent on the matter. They talked about the child's education, and about the future he would inherit. One cold evening, deep into the 5th month of her pregnancy, Evelina found Isaiah in the storehouse as usual, checking the winter supplies. She was feeling the weight of the child now, the reality of the life growing inside her. "I have made arrangements for the nursery," Evelina said, rubbing her aching back. "It will be Arthur's old room, overlooking the front lawn." Isaiah turned, his eyes fixed on the outline of the child beneath her gown. He spoke slowly, a rare moment where his professional composure cracked, revealing the men beneath the duty. "Mistress Caldwell," he began, his voice rough. "You must promise me one thing. When he is born, you must treat him as Arthur's son. You must never let him feel the difference, or the shame, of his true blood. If he is to save Oakage, he must be a Caldwell. Fully. He will be Arthur's son," Evelina promised, meeting his gaze. "He will be raised as the master of this house. He will never know the truth from me. And you, Isaiah, will be his protector, his guide, his silent father." "And the manumission papers?" Isaiah pressed, needing the reassurance that his ultimate sacrifice would lead to his ultimate freedom. "They are with Percival Finch, sealed, to be filed on the day the child legally takes control of Oakage. As we agreed. You have my word. And that word is tied to the life of the child I carry." The bargain was reaffirmed, sealed not just by paper, but by the growing life that connected them. The enslaved man and the widow had created their heir. And now they were entering the final, dangerous stretch, the birth, and the presentation of the lie to the world. The secret was growing, solidifying, becoming a living, breathing entity that would soon walk the grounds of Oakage, challenging every established law of South Carolina. The long wait was almost over. And the real danger, the danger of exposure, was just beginning. The final months of Evelina's pregnancy were not a time of peaceful waiting. They were a siege. The house felt like a fortress under attack, and the enemy was the truth. Evelina grew heavy and slow. Her condition was no longer a secret, but a celebrated, if melancholic, miracle. She leaned into the role of the frail, grieving widow, allowing Clara to manage the household details and giving her an excuse to keep everyone, especially curious neighbors, at arm's length. The problem, as always, was proximity. The household staff, the enslaved people who moved through the house every day. They were sharp observers. They knew the rhythms of the Caldwell marriage, and they knew Arthur had been ill and distant for a long time before his death. Evelina relied heavily on Sarah, Isaiah's mother, the woman who was now secretly free, but still served as the primary cook and maid in the main house. Sarah was a quiet woman, fiercely loyal to her son, and profoundly grateful for the paper that secured her liberty. She understood the stakes without needing to be told the specifics of the pact. She saw the glances between Evelina and Isaiah, the late-night meetings, and the intense, shared dread. Sarah became Evelina's shadow, a silent guardian against accidental exposure. When a maid came too close to Evelina's door after midnight, Sarah was there with a sudden chore. When Clara asked too many detailed questions about the timeline of the pregnancy, Sarah was there with a distraction about spoiled milk or a broken churn. Isaiah, meanwhile, was everywhere. He maintained the plantation's operation with a relentless efficiency that impressed the bank's agents and utterly infuriated Silas Thorne, who was hearing rumors of the posthumous heir and beginning to circle closer to Oakage. "He's a ghost," Silas Thorne grumbled to his cronies in town. "Arthur Caldwell hasn't been dead 6 months, and already she claims a miracle. It's a fraud, I tell you. A desperate trick to keep the land." Silas was right, of course. But he had no proof. And Percival Finch, now thoroughly invested in the stability of the estate and terrified of being entangled in a scandal, was doing his job well. Finch presented the bank with the guarantee of continuity and the fabricated ledgers Isaiah had prepared, showing a sound, if leveraged, financial structure. The bank, seeing the promise of an heir and a competent manager, Isaiah, whom they considered a highly valuable asset, agreed to wait. The foreclosure clock slowed down, giving Elenina the precious time she needed. The greatest fear, however, was the birth itself. Elenina refused to use Dr. Jenkins, the local man who had delivered all her daughters. Jenkins was too gossipy, too familiar with Arthur's final, sickly months. Instead, she claimed a fear of the local doctor's methods and arranged for a midwife, a woman named Martha, from a small, isolated community 50 miles away. Martha was paid handsomely in advance, with the promise of even more gold for absolute, unquestioning silence. "You will arrive late next spring," Elenina instructed Martha during a secret meeting in Charleston, disguised as a shopping trip. "You will be told that the child is premature, born of my deep grief and poor health. You will speak to no one but me, and you will leave immediately after the birth." Martha, a weary woman who knew the price of silence in the South, simply nodded and pocketed the gold. As the spring of 1809 approached, the tension at Oakage was so thick you could almost taste it in the air. Elenina had retreated completely, confined to her room, claiming severe weakness. Clara managed the house, while Isaiah managed everything else. The date was set for the lie. The child would be born in early May. The night the labor began, everything went according to Elenina's meticulous, desperate plan. It was a stormy night, rain lashing against the windows, masking the sounds of the house. Sarah was the first to realize it was time. She quietly sent for Martha, who had been housed secretly in the isolated laundry cottage for 2 days, waiting. Isaiah was waiting, too. He was not in the storehouse. He was in the small, unused study, the one closest to the back stairs, pretending to review accounts. He kept the door locked, listening to the muffled cries from the main house. He was closer than he dared to be, yet agonizingly far from the woman and the child who carried his blood. The labor was long and brutal. Elenina, already weakened by months of stress and poor eating, fought through the pain, fueled only by the need to survive and secure the future. She had to deliver this heir. She had to survive the lie. The midwife Martha was efficient and silent. Sarah stayed by Elenina's side, wiping her brow, her face etched with concern, a mixture of fear for her mistress and profound anxiety for her son's fate. Finally, just as the first pale light of dawn broke through the heavy clouds, a cry pierced the tense silence. "It's a boy, Mistress Caldwell," Martha announced, holding up the squalling infant. Elenina, exhausted, lifted her head. She saw the small, red face, the dark fuzz of hair. He was healthy. He was male. A wave of crushing relief washed over her, followed immediately by the cold, terrifying realization of what she had just done. She had brought a lie into the world, a living, breathing testament to their secret pact. "He is Arthur's son," Elenina whispered, solidifying the lie with her first breath. After the delivery, Arthur Caldwell Jr. Sarah took the baby to clean him, and Martha went about her duties. The news was announced immediately to the household. A son. A posthumous miracle. The servants celebrated quietly, knowing this meant stability, and stability meant they were safer from being sold. Clara, Beatrice, and Lily were brought in. Their faces were alight with wonder and grief-tinged joy. Clara, the eldest, approached the cradle with a solemn reverence. She looked at the tiny, swaddled bundle, the salvation of Oakridge. "He looks like Papa," she murmured, though Arthur Caldwell had been a frail, fair-haired man, and this baby was robust and dark-featured. But Clara needed him to look like Papa. She needed the lie to be true. Elenina watched her daughters gather around the cradle, accepting their new brother, and felt a perverse sense of triumph. The lie was working. Meanwhile, Isaiah, hearing the news from the hushed excitement of the house staff, finally allowed himself to breathe. His son was safe. He was alive. And he was the master of Oakridge. He remained in the study, reviewing the ledgers, the perfect picture of a loyal, indispensable driver, while a few feet away his child was being celebrated as the heir of the men who had owned him. Martha was paid and sent away before noon, her trail covered meticulously by Isaiah. Dr. Jenkins was then summoned, not to deliver the child, but to certify the birth and the mother's health, confirming the story of the premature, grief-stricken delivery. The news of the birth traveled fast, riding the dusty roads of South Carolina like wildfire. Percival Finch arrived 2 days later, beaming and sweating. "Mrs. Caldwell, a stroke of Providence. We are saved. I have already informed the bank. They are satisfied. The estate is secure, pending the heir's majority." The only person not celebrating was Silas Thorne. Silas arrived at Oakage 3 days after the birth, riding hard, his face mottled with fury. He strode into the parlor, ignoring the servants, demanding to see Ellalinina. Ellalinina, weak but resolute, received him. She was holding the baby, Arthur Jr., tightly, using the child as a shield. "Silas," she said coolly. "You are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Silas roared. "I am the rightful heir. This child is a fabrication, Ellalinina. Arthur was in his grave before this child was conceived. You concocted this lie to keep my inheritance." Ellalinina met his gaze, her exhaustion replaced by a fierce, maternal protectiveness. "You insult the memory of my husband, Silas. The child was conceived in the final, blessed moments we shared before his illness took him. Dr. Jenkins has certified the birth. Percival Finch has informed the bank. Arthur Jr. is the legitimate heir of Oakage, and you have no claim here." Silas Thorne was a bully, but he was also a man of law, however twisted. He couldn't challenge the birth without proof, and the entire structure, the lawyer, the certified doctor, the timing, was flawless. The lie was legally sound. "I will find the truth, Ellalinina," Silas spat, his eyes blazing with malice. "I will wait 20 years if I have to, but I will prove this child is not Arthur's blood." "Then you will wait," Ellalinina replied, her voice steady. "And you will find nothing but the truth. This is the master of Oakage." Silas left, his defeat palpable. But his threat hung in the air like swamp gas. He was not gone. He was merely waiting for the secret to crack. Life at Oakage settled into a new, complex rhythm. The plantation was safe. The future secured by a tiny, vulnerable boy. Ellalinina became a devoted, fiercely protective mother. She loved Arthur Jr. not just because he was the savior of her family, but because he was her son, the secret link to the only truly capable man she had ever known. She watched him grow, fascinated by his quick intelligence and the quiet strength he seemed to inherit. Isaiah watched, too, but from a distance. His role changed subtly. He was now not just the driver, he was the primary estate manager, the man who held the real authority over the land and the ledgers. Higgins, the overseer, was slowly marginalized, taking orders from Isaiah that were then relayed through Ellalinina, maintaining the pretense of white authority. But Isaiah's greatest duty was silent observation. He watched his son grow up in the big house, dressed in fine clothes, playing with his half-sisters, being taught to read and write by Ellalinina. He saw the boy's potential, and he felt the deep, aching pain of being unable to claim him. The daughters adored the baby. Lily, the youngest, treated him like a living doll. Beatrice sketched him constantly. Clara, however, remained the greatest internal threat. She was 18, and now 20. And she was smart. She loved her little brother, but she saw the strange, intense connection between her mother and Isaiah. Clara noticed that when Arthur Jr. was sick, Ellalinina didn't call for Dr. Jenkins, she called for Isaiah. She noticed that the baby, when he was old enough to crawl, seemed to recognize Isaiah's deep, steady voice even from the distance of the fields. One afternoon, when Arthur Jr. was nearly 2 years old, Clara found Ellalinina in the parlor watching the boy play with a wooden soldier. "Mama," Clara began, her voice low and serious. I have to ask you something. Evelina's heart slammed against her ribs. She was always prepared for this question, yet it still terrified her. Yes, Clara. Arthur Jr. is bright, and he is a blessing, Clara said, carefully choosing her words. But he is different. Papa was frail, his hair was light. Arthur Jr. is robust, dark, and has the strongest will I have ever seen in a child. He looks nothing like the Caldwells. Evelina sighed, forcing a look of weary sadness. Clara, you are looking for ghosts. Grief changes people, my dear. And the fever that took your father, it had been in his blood for months. Perhaps it affected the child's constitution. He is healthy, strong, and he is Arthur's last gift to us. Do not question Providence, child. Clara backed down, but her suspicion didn't vanish. She didn't dare voice the real, monstrous thought that sometimes crept into her mind, the thought that Arthur Jr. bore a striking resemblance, in the set of his jaw and the deep intensity of his eyes, to the men who ran the plantation. The lie was a living thing, and it was demanding constant maintenance. The greatest difficulty was the growing bond between Arthur Jr. and Isaiah. As the child grew, Evelina encouraged the relationship, masking it under the necessity of plantation life. Isaiah, she would say publicly, take Arthur Jr. with you to the fields today. He must learn the land if he is to inherit it. Isaiah would take the boy on his rounds. Arthur Jr., dressed in his crisp linen suit, would sit on the broad back of the mule, clutching Isaiah's shirt, fascinated by the sights and sounds of the plantation. These were the only moments of true, unburdened fatherhood Isaiah knew. He taught the boy about the soil, about the rhythm of the rice paddies, about the names of the stars. He taught him responsibility and quiet strength. He spoke to the boy always in the formal, respectful manner required of the driver addressing the young master, but his eyes held a depth of tenderness that transcended the social boundaries. One day, when Arthur Jr. was 3, he was playing near the blacksmith's forge, where Isaiah was supervising a repair. The boy wandered too close to a stack of hot metal. Before anyone could shout, Isaiah moved. He scooped the boy up, pulling him away from the searing heat. Arthur Jr. was startled but not hurt. He wrapped his arms around Isaiah's neck, burrowing into the man's strength. Thank you, Isaiah, the boy said simply, his small voice echoing in the quiet heat of the forge. You are welcome, Master Arthur, Isaiah replied, setting him down gently. But the moment had been witnessed by several field hands, and more dangerously, by Clara, who was walking toward the quarters with Sarah. Clara saw the speed of Isaiah's protection, the instinctive, powerful reaction of a father. That evening, Clara confronted Evelina again, not about the looks, but about the connection. Mama, you rely on Isaiah too much. He is becoming too familiar with Arthur Jr. People talk. It is not proper for the master's son to be so close to the driver. Evelina was tired of the constant vigilance, tired of fighting the tides of society. Clara, Evelina said, her voice sharp with exhaustion. Isaiah saved this estate. He's the only reason you have a roof over your head. Arthur trusted him absolutely. And so do I. He's teaching Arthur Jr. how to run this land, something none of us can do. If the boy is to survive Silas Thorne's scrutiny, he must know the land better than anyone. Let Isaiah teach him. Clara fell silent, realizing the truth in that statement. The boy was the heir, but he was also the collateral, and if he failed to manage the land, the bank would return, and Silas would pounce. The years began to pass. 5 years since Arthur's death. The deadline for the will passed without incident. Arthur Jr. was a lively, intelligent 5-year-old, officially recognized as the heir, the future of Oak Ridge. The bank was satisfied. Silas Thorne had retreated, licking his wounds, but still watching from a distance. The secret had survived the birth, the scrutiny, and the initial years of childhood. It was a victory, but it was also a heavy, permanent burden. Evelina was now a woman defined by her enormous secret. She was outwardly the respected mistress, but internally she was a desperate conspirator, eternally linked to Isaiah. She had saved Oakage, but she had shattered the laws of her world to do it. Isaiah, too, was changed. He was the most powerful man on the plantation, controlling every aspect of the labor and the finances. Yet he remained legally enslaved, waiting for the distant day of his son's majority to claim the freedom promised in the sealed papers. He held his son's future and his own in his strong, capable hands. But the secret was about to face its greatest challenge, one that neither Evelina nor Isaiah had fully prepared for. Clara, now 23, was finally being courted seriously. Mr. Thomas Ellington, a respected, if somewhat dull, planter from a neighboring county, was paying her earnest attention. He was respectable, wealthy, and most importantly, white. Thomas Ellington began spending substantial time at Oakage, observing the plantation, and observing the family dynamics. He was a man who believed deeply in order, propriety, and the strict hierarchy of the South. And Thomas Ellington, the prospective son-in-law, had noticed the same thing Clara had noticed, but with a colder, more calculating eye. He noticed the competence of Isaiah, the driver, and the unusual deference paid to him by Mrs. Caldwell. And he noticed the undeniable, striking resemblance between the driver and the young master, Arthur Jr. The secret that had been protected by silence and fear was now in danger of being exposed by the arrival of a new, judgmental eye in the Caldwell household. The stability they had fought so hard for was about to be tested by a man who valued reputation above all else, a man who would soon be family. The tension was building. And the quiet life of lies at Oakridge was about to explode into the open. The arrival of Thomas Ellington at Oakage was like introducing a block of ice into a steaming hot stew. He was precise, he was proper, and he saw things too clearly. Thomas began his courtship of Clara, spending his evenings on the veranda, but his eyes were always moving, measuring the fields, counting the workers, and inevitably, observing the little boy who was supposed to be his future brother-in-law. Arthur Jr., at 5 years old, was a miniature force of nature. He was quick, strong, and his skin was kissed by the sun in a way that the Caldwells, known for their pale, indoor complexions, never were. His hair was dark and tightly curled, unlike Arthur Caldwell's thin, sandy mop. Most damningly, his eyes were the exact shade of deep, intelligent brown that belonged to Isaiah. Thomas tried to ignore the nagging feeling for weeks. He was a man of logic. The boy was the certified heir. But the resemblance, especially when Arthur Jr. stood near Isaiah, which he often did, drawn by the driver's quiet strength, was impossible to dismiss. The crisis came one hot afternoon when Thomas found Arthur Jr. sitting on the steps of the main house, carefully carving a small wooden horse. Isaiah had taught him how to handle the knife safely. "That's fine work, young master," Thomas said, trying to be friendly. Arthur Jr. looked up, his brow furrowed in concentration, the exact, intense furrow Isaiah often wore when reviewing the ledgers. Thomas felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. He didn't see Arthur Caldwell in that face. He saw the enslaved men who ran the plantation. That evening, he waited until Evelina was resting and cornered Clara in the music room. "Clara, we must speak. And this must be kept in the strictest confidence," Thomas said, his voice tight with controlled outrage. Clara, happy and dreaming of their wedding, looked up, startled by his severity. "What is it, Thomas?" "It concerns your brother, Arthur Jr., he said, leaning in. "And your mother. And the driver, Isaiah." Clara's face went white. She had lived with this fear for years. "I don't know what you mean." "Do not play coy, Clara. I am a man of property and order. I see what is before my eyes. That child is not Arthur Caldwell's son. He bears no resemblance to the Caldwell line, but he is the spitting image of that driver. Your mother is carrying out a fraud. A criminal, scandalous fraud." Clara stood up, shaking. She could deny it, but Thomas's certainty was terrifying. The truth, ugly and raw, was hanging between them. "You must be mad, Thomas. How dare you suggest such a thing about my mother, a grieving widow?" "I dare because I must protect you. If this secret is exposed, and it will be, your mother will be ruined. The child will be stripped of his claim, and Oak Ridge will fall into the hands of Silas Thorne. Do you understand? I am marrying into a potential disaster." Thomas's fear was not for Evelina's soul, but for his investment. That was the crack in his armor. Clara, recognizing the true depth of the danger, realized she had a choice. Uphold the truth and ruin everyone, or uphold the lie and save them. She was a Caldwell, and the survival of the land came first. "You will not speak of this again, Thomas," Clara said, her voice surprisingly firm, channeling her mother's hard-won resolve. "My mother is a fragile woman who found comfort in a final, blessed moment with her husband. If you spread this malicious rumor, you will not only be insulting my family, but you will be inviting Silas Thorne to destroy this entire community. Do you want to be known as the men who brought ruin to the Caldwells and handed 200 souls over to Silas's cruelty? No reputable family in South Carolina will ever speak to you again." She had used the threat of Silas and the threat of social ruin, the two things Thomas feared most. Thomas stared at her, caught between his moral outrage and his financial self-preservation. He wanted the security of Oak Ridge, and the only way to get it was through the lie. "I will speak to your mother," he finally ground out. Evelina was waiting for him. Clara had warned her, and Evelina had prepared. She sat in the parlor, the 5-year-old Arthur Jr. playing quietly at her feet with a set of blocks. Thomas laid out his accusations, his voice trembling with anger and fear. Evelina listened patiently, her face a mask of dignified, wounded piety. When he finished, she did not yell. She simply picked up her son and held him close. "Mr. Ellington," she said, her voice dripping with sorrow. "I understand your confusion. Grief is a strange thing, and the stress of the estate has been immense. But to suggest that I, a devoted wife, would commit such a sin, such a crime, is an unforgivable slander." She fixed him with a cold, unforgiving stare. "This is Arthur Caldwell's son. He is the master of Oak Ridge. If you ever repeat this monstrous rumor, I will ensure that Percival Finch, the courts, and every reputable family in this county hears of your malicious attempt to destabilize a grieving family and steal a child's inheritance. You will be ruined, Thomas. Do you understand me? Utterly ruined." Thomas looked from the fierce widow to the innocent boy, and then to the silent, determined Clara standing by the door. He saw the fortress they had built, and he realized that trying to breach it would destroy him, too. He swallowed his outrage. "Mrs. Caldwell," he mumbled, defeated. "I apologize. The stress has clearly affected my judgment. I only seek the security of my future family." "Then you will secure it by supporting Arthur Jr., Evelina concluded, sealing the bargain. Thomas Ellington married Clara Caldwell 3 months later. He was silenced, but not convinced. He became a permanent, watchful presence on the plantation, a constant reminder to Evelina and Isaiah that the secret was always on the verge of collapse. The years that followed were a long, tense holding pattern. Evelina became the matriarch, hardened by the necessity of her deception. She managed the house, raised Arthur Jr. with fierce devotion, and maintained the elaborate illusion of her late husband's financial genius, all thanks to the actual genius of Isaiah. Isaiah remained the rock. He was the most powerful man in the fields, the men whom the bank trusted, the men whom Thomas Ellington watched with simmering hatred, and the only man Arthur Jr. truly looked up to. His life was a contradiction, a slave who commanded the entire operation, a father who could never claim his son. The secret never broke. Clara, bound by the necessity of survival, never spoke of her suspicion. Beatrice and Lily, now grown and married, accepted Arthur Jr. as their beloved youngest brother. Sarah, Isaiah's mother, continued her quiet, free existence in the kitchen, a living testament to the first part of the bargain. And Arthur Jr. grew. He was educated by tutors, learned Greek and Latin, and mastered the complex mathematics of planting and trading. But his real education came from Isaiah. Every afternoon, the young master would drop his books and ride out with the driver, learning the land, the soil, and the people. He learned the language of the enslaved community, the quiet dignity of their suffering, and the immense knowledge they held about the earth. He learned respect, not just from his mother, but from the men he called Isaiah. Arthur Jr. turned 16, then 18, then 19. The day of his 21st birthday, the day he would legally take possession of Oakage, loomed like a distant, inevitable sunrise. On the morning of the young master's 21st birthday, May 14, 1830, the house was filled with quiet celebration. The bank was satisfied. Silas Thorne had died 5 years earlier, defeated and bitter, his claim extinguished forever. Percival Finch, now a very old and very nervous man, arrived early, clutching the sealed packet containing Isaiah's manumission papers. Evelina met Finch in the study, the same room where she had held her first secret meetings with Isaiah 22 years ago. "The time has come, Percival," Evelina said, her voice heavy with the weight of 2 decades of deception. She was 53 now, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes holding the deep wisdom of a woman who had seen the abyss and walked away. Finch, trembling slightly, pulled out the document. "Mrs. Caldwell, I must confess, this has been the most terrifying legal secret of my entire career." "It saved us all, Percival," Evelina reminded him. "Now file it immediately. Arthur Caldwell Jr. is the master of Oakage, and the debt is paid." Finch took the papers and left, promising to file the manumission before noon. Evelina then summoned Isaiah. He entered the study, still wearing the clothes of the driver, his face unreadable, but his shoulders held the tension of 20 years of waiting. "Isaiah," Evelina said simply, "it is done. Percival is filing the papers now. You are a free man." Isaiah closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the immense, impossible truth. He was no longer property. He was a man. "Thank you, Mistress Caldwell," he said, his voice deep and steady, devoid of the emotion that must have been raging inside him. "No, Isaiah," Evelina corrected him, meeting his gaze. "Thank you. You saved us all. You gave us our future." The silence that followed was full of their shared history. The fear, the danger, the child. "What will you do now?" Evelina asked. "I will remain here," Isaiah replied without hesitation. "Arthur Jr. needs me. He is the master of the land, but he is still young. I know the people. I know the land, and I know the ledgers better than anyone. I will stay as his manager. His paid steward." Evelina nodded, relief washing over her. She knew Arthur Jr. would be lost without him. "He will offer you a fair salary and a proper home," Evelina promised. "I expect nothing less," Isaiah said, a faint, rare smile touching his lips. That afternoon, a celebration was held for Arthur Jr. The young man, tall and commanding, accepted the congratulations of the neighbors, including a still resentful Thomas Ellington. He was the undisputed master of Oakage. In the midst of the celebration, Arthur Jr. sought out Isaiah, who was standing quietly near the stables, observing the crowd. "Isaiah," Arthur Jr. said, approaching him with the respect he always showed. "My mother tells me you are now officially a free man. I am glad for you. My first act as master is to offer you the position of general manager of Oakage, with a salary that reflects your indispensable value. Will you accept?" Isaiah looked at his son, the young man he had raised in secret, the heir he had risked everything to protect. He saw the strength, the intelligence, and the deep, inherent fairness he had helped instill. "I accept, Master Arthur," Isaiah replied, giving the title the respect it deserved. But as he looked into the young man's eyes, he saw a glimmer of understanding, a sharp intelligence that suggested the young master knew more than he let on. Arthur Jr. had grown up watching the intense, silent bond between his mother and the driver. He had seen the resemblance in the mirror. He had felt the silent connection in the fields. Arthur Jr. held out his hand, not just as a master to a manager, but as one capable man to another. "Welcome to the family, Isaiah," Arthur Jr. said. The word family weighted with a complexity only the two of them could truly grasp. Isaiah shook his hand. A free man. A silent father. The true architect of Oak Ridge's survival. The secret never left the confines of the main house and the lawyer's safe. Elenina Caldwell had broken every rule of her society, committed a crime against the law of the land, and risked her life and the life of the men she relied on. But she had done it to save her daughters, to save the 200 souls on the property, and to secure the future of Oak Ridge. The enslaved men had given the widow the heir she needed, and in return, he had earned his freedom, and the quiet, permanent knowledge that the master of Oak Ridge carried his blood. The lie had become the truth. And the greatest secret of South Carolina, born of desperation and courage, was finally safe, woven into the very destiny of the land.